So, well, man, it's great to meet you. I really am looking forward to getting into your work and how you evolved into this point. And I want to begin our conversation with 4 years ago, we were trying to figure out this pandemic. What were the lasting ramifications? How are we going to get out of it? And ultimately, at this point, how did you get through that time period? And how did it change the way that you do work now?
Sure. For me personally or for the company?
Probably both. I think both of them kind of blend into
Sure.
each other.
Yeah. So the pandemic was a really interesting time. I was living in New York City, 600 square foot apartment, a wife and a cat. We're both trying to work remotely, and it's a one bedroom. You can hear each other yelling in it. We certainly got on each other's nerves at that point, right? We've been living together for like 10 years, but imagine living with a spouse in 600 square feet. It just doesn't work out well. So and New York City had really gone crazy with the lockdowns. You were basically not allowed out anywhere. You couldn't go there. Everything was shut down. So the way we dealt with it was honestly like I was working at a trucking company at that time. I would just go in, 3, 4 days a week because trucking was one of the essential services that kept going because it was essential to keep goods, medicines, food moving. So I just go into the office and work out of the office. And in the office, maybe 10% of staff were showing up. So that would help me continue work effectively, but also kept my relationship alive personally and just candidly kept me sane. Right, I just could not sit in a house all the time. So the pandemic was a difficult time. Not thankfully we weren't health wise affected, but difficult in the sense of like, hey, you're crammed into a can with another human being. That's all you see. Really don't interact with people. I used to run a poker game pre-pandemic, and we tried to switch that to online, but it's not quite the same fun as sitting around with a bunch of friends having beer and pizza, and fighting over quarters and dollars. Super low stakes poker.
So, so I'm curious if we were to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids right now and they wanted to know what you did on a daily basis for a living, it's career day, what would you tell them if one of them asked you?
Sure. So I run a software company that helps people put their coolest ideas together and in front of each other and share those ideas in a way that's really fun and exciting. And we do this for very large companies as well as very small companies, as well as big government agencies like NASA.
So, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
So my dream throughout my childhood was to be a scientist, to go study physics, get a PhD in physics, and go be a professor somewhere.
So, how did you get to this point? Take me back to where you're born and raised. What were the seeds that were planted into you to become a leader and to do what you're doing today? How did this happen?
Sure. So childhood had a really weird childhood. My folks were immigrants from India back in the 1980s, and they made an incredibly tough decision, which is they realized they couldn't afford to take care of a newly born kid, and they actually sent me back to live with my grandparents in India. So I was raised by a single grandmother in India and actually didn't meet my parents till I was 5 or 6 years old, right before I started kindergarten. So grew up, bouncing back and forth between India and Canada. And showed up in college, was like, okay, I want to study sciences, and that's what I did. I got my degree in math and physics, did some research along the way, and kind of what I discovered about myself really through college was, look, I love the math side of things, I love science, I love figuring out how things work, but I'm a massive extrovert. I love talking to people, I'm competitive, I was a varsity athlete. And one of the challenges with science is it's really wonderful intellectually, but it's a very lonely field of endeavor where you're often just sitting by yourself in front of a computer instead of in front of a whiteboard or blackboard, and you're not talking to people. And so when I realized that, I was like, okay, I love the math side of things, I love figuring out how things work, but I want to be out there competing and talking to people. And the right mix, that's exactly the right sort of personality for Wall Street, which is where I went for the first, 10 odd years of my career. I went to a big place like Bain Capital, invested in big multi-billion dollar companies, got an opportunity to learn from really incredibly smart people who were good at what they did.
So, talk to me a little bit about heroes. Obviously growing up the way you did and being as highly driven as you are, who was that hero or inspiration that fueled you to keep going and to achieve?
Sure. So I'd say I'd give three heroes. One was this guy named Donovan Bailey, who was an Olympic athlete, won the gold medal in the 100-meter men's sprints. So this was happening right around when I was 12, and he was actually living, not too far away from where I grew up. So it was kind of just a local hero story, right? Hey, here's someone who grew up similar sort of humble lower middle class background and went to win a gold medal at the Olympics. Um, Number two, I jointly say my parents, right? Giving up your kid and staying away from your and not seeing your kid for 5 years in order to give them a better life. It's like the immigrants steering on steroids. So them having made that incredible sacrifice to give me the opportunities. Um, Number three, Stephen Hawking. As I mentioned, I wanted to be a scientist growing up, and he obviously, was faced with tremendous physical challenges, and yet, overcame those challenges and did extraordinary things for the world of science and for humanity. It's an inspiring story when you can overcome, basically a disease that renders you totally invalid.
So if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find inspirational or fascinating, who would that be? Who would you love to meet?
Um, this is probably going to be something that a lot of people say, but like Elon Musk, I think he's a once in a generation talent. Setting aside his politics and things like that, the guy's basically revolutionizing multiple industries at once. If there's someone who's going to get us to Mars, it's going to be someone like him. And I would love to just spend 5 minutes with a guy, once in a generation talent like him.
So let me ask you this. When you look back on your career and all of the incarnations of what you've done on your timeline, what was one of the time periods where you grew the most? Maybe it was the hardest and the reward was sweetest. What was that time period for you?
Sure. I'd say my first, I joined a consulting firm called McKinsey about a year after college, and I knew nothing showing up about business. I'd studied no business, no accounting, no marketing, no strategy. And McKinsey, they go to, large organizations and try and give them strategic advice on a variety of different industries. And it's really difficult because you might be doing a marketing project for a pharmaceutical company for 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden you're in wearing steel-toed boots and in a chemical plant doing operational improvement, and you know nothing about operations, you know nothing about chemicals, you know nothing. And so every 6 weeks you're having to learn a new job and a new industry. And that's really difficult because, again, I'm 21 years old. I know nothing about nothing. And you imagine starting a new job every 6 weeks. But at the same time, you grow a lot because all of a sudden, coming out of a 2 year consulting program like that, hey, you've worked in 6 or 7 different industries. You've done everything from advise a CEO about his or her grant strategy to being in a chemical plant, figuring out like where the leaks are in a chemical pipeline. So that was like tremendously difficult. I was working 100-hour weeks, traveling constantly, but learned just an immense amount that I'm deeply grateful for.
So what is it that motivates you every day to get up to do the work that you do, to lead people, to help people, and to also evolve as a human yourself?
Sure. Three things, right? Number one, I'm a bit of a nerd. I just like learning. I'm constantly reading. I'm actually taking continuing education courses right now in a bunch of from a bunch of different kind of online universities. So I like learning. Number two is I like building things. My favorite job, and part of the way I paid for my way through high school and college was I was a carpenter. I liked building things and seeing, hey, at the end of the summer, we built this, part of a mall or built this temple or church. That's a tremendously rewarding feeling. And number three, I like building jobs, right? So like one of the things I'm most proud of, especially at Idea Scale, is over the last 2 years, most tech companies have had massive layoffs. And yet, under my leadership at Idea Scale, we've actually grown headcount by about 25%. It feels really good to know that, hey, I'm creating jobs, and not only for those people, but that creates stability for their families. They can pay for their kids, their wives, their husbands to continue on and maintain a lifestyle. That's a really good feeling that you're, creating opportunities for people.
So the thing about business is it's a lot like sports. We kind of revere these companies that like Amazon that begin at this place where no one knows what they're going to do and then they become a behemoth. What business model exists out in the world that you admire the most? That you either emulate or you think, "Wow, they got it figured out."
Professional sports, I'd say it's an area where I personally don't have a lot of experience. I mean, I go to sports games, but what I've always admired about them is they have such a complicated system that they have to manage the fans, the advertisers, the athletes, the coaches, the owners. And yet they all get that done, and they've created these incredibly valuable enterprises that create entertainment for hundreds or millions or billions of people around the world, and yet have also able to do it in a way that's actually a business and kind of everyone walks away winning at the end of the day. And that's really cool when you have so many powerful and disparate stakeholders that are demanding different things.
That is so true. I think about that all the time. There's just so much that goes into even one game. All of the tickets, all of the vending, all of the things, all of the decisions. One guy goes to the minors, another guy comes up. The superstar has to do the interview after the game. There's like all of these moving pieces. And I marvel at that when I go to games. I'm like, my God, when we look at these people that run this, like the Royals just got a new owner around the time the pandemic began. And I think when you inherit something like that, you already have this machine, but you also have to put your own spin on it. Because right now we're thinking about getting a new stadium, and there's all of those things that go into it. But yeah, you're right, man. I've asked this question a lot, and I've never got that answer, but it's 100% true. Because even the NBA, for instance, I went to my first NBA game this spring. My son's a big fan. We took the family down, and it was in Oklahoma City, and it was wild, man. It was the most entertaining sport event I'd ever been at. DJs on every level, this like thing flying around, taking pictures of everybody, all these mascots doing backflips and slamming the ball, shooting t-shirts out of cannons, and all of that before even they got on the field to play. It was wild. So anyway, it is mind-blowing.
Yeah. No,
So
it's fun, right? Setting aside the business part, it's amazing that they're able to generate just this, tremendous feeling of unified value where you and I can be from different sides of the railroad, show up to a game, be cheering for different teams, and both have walked away having a great time.
absolutely, for sure. So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight and ran into a much younger version of you, say 18 years old, and you had to give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained along the way, what advice would you impart, and would that version of you listen?
I think the advice I would impart is focus on continuous learning. And by that, I mean, look, you spend the first 20, 25 years of your life in school, right? Depending on, how many degrees you want to go after, whether you stop after high school. But then there was this period of like 8 or 9 years from when I graduated college till, about 2 years ago, where I wasn't, continuing my education. I wasn't taking courses. I wasn't reading as much. Um, and I would give the advice to my, younger self that, hey, you need to go learn. And it's for two reasons. Number one, it's just going to make you happier and more interesting as a human being. But number two, no matter how smart you are, no matter what industry you're in, you need to keep sharpening your skills, because I think I underestimated how important it is to keep on developing those skills once you're in your career, rather than just say, hey, I finished college, or I finished high school, I finished my trade degree. That's all I need to go through life. You always need to be sharpening your skills. Even let's say carpentry. There's always new techniques, new materials, new glues coming out, right? Surgeons are always taking continuing education course on new medical techniques, new drugs. And I think we underestimate in the world of business that though continuing education is important too.
Absolutely, it is. So, if everything that you've done and evolved into at this point and achieved in your career, what are you the proudest of?
So I think the thing that I'm most proud of is earning a college degree, specifically in math. And for two reasons. Number one, again, classic immigrant story. My parents gave up a lot to give me an opportunity to, attend college. So making them proud was is an important part of who I am or what I was trying to achieve in life. And number two, for me personally, earning a math degree was really, really hard. You can't fake your or BS your way through a math program. And the fact that I made it through, I did well. I took courses that were, well beyond my IQ level and struggled through them. But at the end of the day, I graduated with a degree in math. Is probably the thing I'm most proud of, in my personal life, or my professional life, I should say. I'm
Yeah.
about to be a father soon, so I'm hopefully that will be a large part of my life soon too.
So, what's the best thing about living in Philadelphia?
I know my neighbors. So like when I was living in New York, I would live in giant skyscrapers with hundreds of thousands of people in the skyscraper. You would literally have no idea who your next door neighbor is, even if you're living them for 2 years. In Philadelphia, I sit out on the porch every Friday night with a couple of beers. People wander, in and out. We all talk to each other. Last week we had a party in my backyard because we couldn't have enough people on the front steps, so everyone came into the backyard. And the fact that we know each other, we're picking up each other's packages to make sure you don't get porch theft. We're taking care of each other's cats. The fact you know your neighbors and like them, and that's true. Like kind of day one, city of brotherly love is truly a correct description of Philadelphia, especially relative to New York.
So, I'm curious. You brought up sports. If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one game, where would you go? Who would you love to have seen? What game would you love to have seen?
Uh, ooh, uh, I would say, who was it? It was the Canucks Stanley Cup in like 2011 or 2012. I forget what which year it was. But again, I grew up in Vancouver, Vancouver Canucks hockey fan. Um, and they lost the, I think, game 7, and I was not in Vancouver at the time, and I just remember like it was a big disappointment for the city, and we had riots and stuff, and I just wish I was there for that energy of the game where your team is like out there to win like the national championship, and they just they flub it at the 7th game. I wish I was there. Even though we
Yeah.
lost, I think it would have been just a tremendous life experience.
Yeah, to feel that energy. The closest I ever got to that was the Kansas City Royals went to the World Series in 2015, and the game that we won to go to the World Series, I bought I paid for parking and took my son out there, and we played catch, and we were just hanging out, and then he sat at the gate. We sat at the gate and watched the game from the gate, and there was a home run, and you could feel it. It was really cool, man. So we only spent $20, but we got totally infused with the genie of excitement. It was awesome, you know. So so at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think or the way I would describe myself if I were, candid and honest, is I'd say I'm a very straightforward, simple guy. Live my life by principles that lay out. I wear my heart on my sleeves. Um, there's no, I have no politics. I have no subtlety. I'm very straightforward in the way I live my life. I try and communicate that to, my wife, my friends, my colleagues. And so usually no one has to guess what I'm thinking for good or bad. And I I think living life in a principles transparent way is easier for everyone around me because they don't have to second guess.
Right on. So what's the thing that you're most excited about being a father?
So look, it's going to be my first kid. It's going to be a major change in life. When you don't have kids, you can focus on just, having fun with your buddies, your wife. You can, focus on work. All of a sudden, you care for another human being. My wife and I were chatting last night. Okay, do we need, how many diapers do we need, bottles? Like, and it really struck me that, hey, I'm going to be responsible for another human being's life. Like right now, I'm responsible for people's livelihoods and making sure they have jobs and get paid and stuff. That's great, but and I take that responsibility very seriously. But very shortly, I'm going to be responsible to make sure a human being, breathes and eats and that's a new terrifying level of responsibility. But it's going to be rewarding when you like, hopefully, over the next 10, 20 years, I see somebody grew up and be like, hey, I kept this person alive and I helped them grow into a interesting human being.
That's wonderful, man. So Nick, if anyone wants to reach out, learn more about what you're doing, any of the good business in your world, where can they go?
Sure. For the company, they can go to ideascale.com or Google Ideascale anywhere. For me personally, I'm super active on LinkedIn. So if you ever search Nick Jane, I think I'm usually the first search result that comes up. I respond to 100% of messages, or you can also email me at nick.jane@ideascale.com.
Excellent, Nick. This has been wonderful, man. Hey, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story. Good luck with fatherhood and everything that comes your way.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Take care.